Welcome to another Wednesday night Fightback. Now, the other day I got a train to Birmingham, and the train was made in Belgium, and the company that took me to Birmingham was a foreign state, effectively. And I think that's not very satisfactory. And the question of railway nationalisation, or bringing railways back into public ownership, has come up. And I gather, Michael, you're not convinced. Firstly, I am convinced. I think that's what we need to do. But you're not convinced. Why aren't you convinced?
Well, I think that there are three things that I think you have to persuade me about. Nationalization means putting this back to be governed by the Department of Transport, whatever it's called. And the first thing I would worry about is that I don't think they're very good. I don't think they have a track record which should inspire trust. The second reason I have is that even if the Department of Transport employees were good, they would still be subject, what they could do would still be subject to the Treasury. And the Treasury would apply the Green Book rules. And if you apply the Green Book rules for public investments, that would mean you'd still get no improvement in the rail services, particularly in the north of England, where they've been systematically neglected and degraded for generations. As with many nationalized industries, the problem is that when you get an industrial dispute, it becomes immediately macro-political. And and that, I think, is probably not helpful. So overall, I think what you've got to prove to me is that this can be a better deal for the traveller and for Britain. Now, you might be able to persuade me, but I think these are tough hurdles.
Well, let me give it a go. So firstly, if you look into the history of railway privatization, it was the major government that did it. And actually, it was a terribly ideological nationalisation. What Major was trying to do was prove that he was still a Thatcherite. And he admits that. And a lot of people that were involved admit that. But what it's done is left us with a model where the state does all the heavy lifting in terms of the national track. And then you allow effectively people to take a punt on particular lines and make a bet. But the trouble is the model is unstable. The East Coast line that I use a lot demonstrates it, because periodically they get their sums wrong, and then the state has to come in and step in and look after it. So, but worse than that, Michael, it's not an integrated national system. It's very, very bitty. So if I get a train from Corbridge to Newcastle, I'm on Northern Rail. And then I'm on a LNER, which is presently in the state, but it used to be private. And if you want to go south or west, you're in a different situation. So it seems to be really bizarre that you'd cut up a system that's meant to be integrated and well organized like that. But my biggest gripe is actually just the sheer unpatriotic nature of this. The French or the Germans would not do this. And Trenitalia or SNCF, you'd never get a situation where they would be humiliated to ask other states to run their national railway. And I think what the Tories have done here is strip the country of the chance to do anything that we can be proud of. Anyway, the point is that in the 70s, you had, yes, a lot of criticism about British Rail, but you had the capacity to design and build intercity 125s, which at the time, actually still are being used, phenomenal bits of railway engineering. And the power system, the powertrain for that was made in Essex, and it's a national system. What I just see, Michael, and it really upsets me, is just a sense of national industrial capitulation where, I'm going to let you in a second, where you just allow the whole thing to tip over, and it's outsourced and disintegrated, and we've lost it, and it's terrible.
Nothing that you said do I disagree with. I think your criticisms are absolutely right. And the stripping away of national infrastructural and industrial power is, ghastly, needs to be corrected. And I'm certainly not going into bat for the privatizations which were put through. But correctly criticizing, I agree with all your criticisms about the system as we now have it. But the question is, what do you do now? how do you fix it? Now, a straightforward nationalization, I think, does run into the problems I mentioned. It's run by the Department of Transport, who aren't very good. You're then subjected to Treasury rules, which means that nothing gets done. And you also politicize any labor disputes. These are serious problems. However, is it not possible to devise a system of control whereby the ills which you have identified can be addressed and corrected, and at the same time, we actually start to build nationally for ourselves a proper rail system? Now, I think it is possible to envisage something like that. And let me explain what I would consider the alternative. And it really, this comes from, you see it in Asia a lot, that you do allow private companies to run this organization, but at the same time, you put them under a very strict scheme of control that says, look, you can make a return on your investment of fixed assets, not of anything else, but just, the value of the fixed asset at, say, 8% or whatever. And therefore, the amount of profit that you can earn will be directly related and only directly related to the amount that you invest in order to build this system. And it seems to me that way you could get the investment that we need, and you could probably get an efficient railway system without worrying about some of the problems that you would get with a classical nationalization. Now, whether those individual companies are state-owned or private, I don't really mind. But the point is, you can do it. I think there ought to be ways you can do it involving the private capital raising, which would be useful.
Let's take that on. So first, I totally agree that if the whole network and the system and the railways were taken back into public ownership, it has to be for the public. I mean, it's not for the unions exclusively. It's not carve-ups and what we had to some extent in the 70s. But I think some of the 70s industrial trouble was embedded with sort of in the Cold War, actually. I think, truthfully, I think whether you'd get that now is debatable. But what I don't buy is that the model that we have now is satisfactory. Effectively, it's rather like the water industry. The model gives people a punt to bleed out profits. Abroad. And actually, I think I can't remember which union did it, but there's a very good video, a slightly spoofy video. Thank you very much for the profits, because we could pile them into the Dutch railways. And this can't be right. I mean, it just seems, I'm against that in principle. And also, I cannot buy that we exclusively as a nation are incapable of running a national network if other European nations can do it. So my point I always make about this, you've got to get the right people leading it. And I would go for the engineers, and actually, to be honest, enthusiastic about railways. And I would have them running Royal British Railways, and I'd have a decent livery system, and I would have it from Caithness to Cornwall, and it would be a national system. The question about the Treasury's control, I would flip that back to you and say, well, there's not much investment now. I mean, the 120 billion they're putting into HS2 is just ridiculous. If you gave that to a nationalized railway, you'd get a lot of refurbishment, but you wouldn't get that scheme, I can promise you. So, yeah, yes, I take some of the points, but I just don't buy. I mean, often if backed into a corner on this stuff, I would ask the rhetorical question, do you think it's working now?
Obviously, I think, to compare any industry with the water industry is a bit of a low blow since they are absolutely scandalous, absolutely should be put under scheme of control. Maybe it's possible to rejig the system and put it under public ownership and avoid some of the mistakes that I think are very likely. I think it would have to be done in conjunction with really overhauling the Treasury, and particularly the Green Book rules, which I think can't be allowed to stand for another decade, God's sake.
I know, I totally agree with you. And I think the thing that gives the lie to that is on investment raising is that the risk-free rate is usually the lowest rate. I just don't buy that the government couldn't have a Royal British Railways bond if they wanted to. And you've said that.
Oh,
Not
yes.
for that purpose, but they could do it if they wanted to. And this applies to so much. I mean, my hunch on this, Michael, it's weird. I really think that human beings, there's a sort of, I'm not sort of quoting Nietzsche or anything, but there's a sort of cyclical thing to a lot of this stuff. Things go in fashions. And I think the railway privatization model and a lot of the other privatization models in the UK have just run out of road. They've tried
totally.
this, and it's
I
just
completely
not
agree.
worked. But I think a good national railway system that we can be proud of in public hands is something that's worthwhile anyway.
I think that having the freedom to travel, for the freedom for people to explore their country and know their country better is a huge good that we have seeded and are seeding through basically incompetent railways and now through these, charges to get into cities. So I think that you haven't persuaded me that classical nationalization is the answer. You have persuaded me that I didn't need any persuading that the current system is hopeless. I think we should work to discover just exactly how we can bring the national interest in its broadest sense back into organizing the rail industry in a way which plainly isn't being served right now.
Well, the first thing I bring back, Michael, is belief, actually, and pride in a system that we all own. And I think that's partly the key to what I'm arguing for. And I think you bring the public on board, and you could get it rolling, and it'd be great. And I think it's got to happen. Actually, I think it will happen.
Well, I go back to the great Iggy Pop passenger. Let's take a ride and see what's mine.
Well, there you go. So we've got Nietzsche and Iggy Pop in the same.
There we are. What could be better for a Friday night fight or a Wednesday night fight back?
What's not to love? Okay. Thanks very much, Michael. Take care.
Cheers.